Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking something incredibly complex, deeply serious, and honestly, extremely urgent. We're going to be decoding the geopolitical tragedy that's currently unfolding in the Indian state of Manipur. This is a story about fractured communities, heavy historical baggage, and an ongoing crisis that has just completely reshaped the entire region. So, let's get right into the facts.
To really wrap our heads around the massive stakes of what we're looking at, we have to start with the human toll. Over 250 people have lost their lives, and more than 60,000, yes, 60,000 individuals have been displaced from their homes and forced into relief camps. We're talking about kids separated from their parents, entire neighborhoods just burned to the ground, and a profound humanitarian emergency that's literally rooted in the very landscape of the state.
Which brings us to Section 1, a geography of division. We really need to understand this core conflict.
Okay, let's dive into this. The easiest way to picture Manipur is like a giant bowl. Right in the center is the Imphal Valley, which makes up just 10% of the state's total landmass. But here's the catch. It houses roughly 65% of the population, which is predominantly the Metis community. Now, surrounding this super-crowded valley are the hills. They make up a whopping 90% of the land, but hold only about 15% of the population, primarily the Kuki and Naga tribal communities. So right off the bat, you have this severe disparity of space and people.
Now, how the law interacts with that unique geography is really what sets the stage. There's this 1960 Land Reform Act, and it legally restricts the Métis community from buying land in those surrounding hill areas. However, the Kuki and Naga communities who hold scheduled tribe status, they are allowed to purchase land in both the hills and the valley. You can probably see how this creates immense mutual anxiety, right? The Métis community feels completely squeezed, legally trapped in a shrinking 10% of the state with literally nowhere to expand. Meanwhile, the hill tribes have this deeply ingrained perception that all the major development, all the administrative power, is concentrated solely in that central valley. So with that geographic pressure cooker established, we can see exactly how it built into the current crisis.
Moving on to Section 2, the May 2023 flashpoint. Let's look at how this crisis actually ignited.
For decades, the Metis community has been demanding scheduled tribe or ST status, arguing that they need it for protection and land rights. And this demand has a long history. The proposal was rejected in 1982 and then rejected again in 2001. But then, fast forward to March 27, 2023, the Manipur High Court ordered the state government to send a proposal to the central government to include the Metis in that ST list. Well, this order immediately sparked massive anxiety among the hill communities. On May 3rd, a tribal solidarity march was organized in the hills to protest the order, and by that evening, things devolved into violent, chaotic clashes. That single day triggered a complete breakdown of order. What followed was, frankly, a massive state intelligence failure. Even with VIPs present in the state that day, authorities completely failed to anticipate or stop the violence. Fast forward to today, and the communities are totally segregated. I mean, Métis cannot enter Kuki-dominated districts like Churchandpur, and Kukis cannot enter the Imphal Valley. Crucial lifelines like National Highway 202 have been severely blockaded, leaving supply trucks stranded for months. We've even seen terrifying hostage crises unfold between armed Naga and Kuki village guards. It is total paralysis. So, how did we get here? Section 3. Historical roots of conflict. We have to trace the past.
Because to truly grasp the depth of this, we have to peel back the layers of a nearly 200-year-old historical web. We actually have to look all the way back to British strategic maneuvering in 1844. Back then, a British political agent named William McCulloch took incoming Kuki refugees who were being pushed north from Myanmar, and he strategically settled them in what he called Sipai villages, right on the edges of the Imphal Valley. His goal? Basically to use the Kukis as a buffer, a first line of defense to protect the Métis kingdom from Naga raids. Think about that. This nearly 2-century-old decision is the absolute root of today's bitter disputes over land rights and who gets to be considered indigenous.
And you know, this friction has sparked terrible violence before. Just look at the 1990s. In April 1992, a kidnapping in the border town of More, which is a highly lucrative international trading route, by the way, ignited a massive conflict. By September, actual war declarations were being issued between Kuki and Naga organizations. This led to 5 solid years of devastating violence, from 1992 to 1997, leaving over 600 people dead and hundreds of villages completely wiped off the map. This dark history of violence over territory and trade routes casts a huge shadow over the current crisis, which leads us right into a major accelerant today.
Section 4, Militancy and the Border. armed groups.
Right now, Manipur is navigating the heavily armed chaos of 31 active militant groups. That's a staggering number. We can broadly categorize them into two columns. On one side, you've got the valley-based militant groups, which are predominantly Métis. Many of these groups don't have peace agreements with the government, and they often operate out of safe havens across the very porous border in Myanmar. Then, on the flip side, you have the hill-based militant groups, primarily Kuki and Naga, who generally operate under specific agreements with the Indian government.
Let's actually define what those agreements look like. Many of those hill-based groups are under what's called a suspension of operations, or SAW. Simply put, this is an agreement where militant cadres agree to halt hostilities and stay put in designated government-monitored camps. In exchange, the government provides the camps and local police do regular check-ins. But as this conflict has dragged on, the line between those quiet camps and the active violence out on the streets has become dangerously blurred, showing us just how fragile this bureaucratic peace really is.
And complicating all of this even further is the border itself. For a long time, India and Myanmar shared a free movement regime. Now, the original intention was really compassionate, allowed tribes with shared heritage to travel 16 kilometers across the border visa-free just to maintain their family ties. But the grim reality on the ground? This liberal border policy has been heavily exploited. It functions as a transit route for militant safe havens, weapon supply lines, and some highly lucrative smuggling operations that destabilize the whole region.
Which transitions us perfectly to Section 5, the shadow of drugs, a growing epidemic.
When we talk about smuggling in this part of the world, we are primarily talking about one specific devastating economy. You see, Manipur sits right next to the infamous Golden Triangle. Following the military coup in Myanmar back in 2021, political instability caused poppy cultivation and synthetic drug production to absolutely skyrocket. And with established routes plus militant groups totally willing to guard those supply lines for a profit, this massive surge of narcotics has just spilled directly over the border into Manipur. It's effectively turning a localized ethnic conflict into a heavily funded cross-border syndicate crisis that threatens broad regional security.
And the fallout from this drug influx? It is a massive public health nightmare. The HIV rate in Manipur currently sits at 0.8% of the total population. To put that into perspective, that is 4 times higher than the Indian national average. 4 times! Just let that sink in for a second. It's a stark reminder that this geopolitical crisis isn't just about land or borders anymore. It is spawning a dire generational health emergency.
Which brings us to our final core segment, Section 6, the devastating human cost, the personal tragedies. Because, beyond all the maps, the complex laws, and the militias, there is a deeply personal reality here. This environment of social instability and incredibly easy access to cheap drugs is destroying a whole generation of youth. Listen to this quote from a 16-year-old in a rehabilitation center in Manipur recounting the loss of his best friend. He said, "I myself injected him drugs. After a few minutes, he passed away. That is the incident I regret the most." It is incredibly heartbreaking, and it perfectly captures the lethal reality of growing up in a conflict zone where the social fabric is completely unraveled.
And the violence has permanently torn everyday families apart. Take the story of a Kuki woman married to a Métis man. When the violence erupted, mobs actually attacked their home. Their caretaker, James, was murdered right on their roof. She recalled, "I could imagine how brutally James was killed. I saw drops of blood scattered." Today, because of the strict ethnic segregation enforcing these newly drawn lines, she and her children are completely separated from her husband. The children cry, asking when they'll see their father again, while she just has to pretend to be strong. It is a brutal humanization of what this rigid ethnic divide actually looks like on the ground.
So where does the leadership stand in all of this? Well, frankly, it's a complete political stalemate. We're looking at years of unchecked violence. The state government lost the faith of the people pretty much immediately as the violence began. Meanwhile, the central government has remained largely silent, with very minimal high-level visits to the region, which has left citizens feeling totally abandoned. Recently, the center did appoint 3 former bureaucrats to top administrative and police roles in the state to try and find a fix. But a lot of people are left wondering, can bureaucratic reshuffling really heal a society that is this deeply fractured?
Which leaves us with this final, haunting question. We've traced the historical roots, we've unpacked the militant complexities, the drug epidemics, and the profound, tragic human suffering. The lines have literally been drawn in blood, and the political apparatus has, so far, failed to bridge the divide. So we really have to ask, how long will Manipur's Song of Sorrow play? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.